Good morning. Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 2, page 1178. So we finished the paragraph, middle of the page, discussing the broader theme is the yichud of Havai and Elikim, das that connects the divine and existence, or better put, the divine that relates to existence with the divine that's beyond existence. Shiluv Adnai b'Havaya and Shiluv Havaya b'Adnai, and Adnai is the name for Ayin, Ayin al Kula. God is the master of everything, which he associated with Dibur Elyon. But to understand speech, how God speaks, he began first with thought, to contrast it. So we learned in this, on page 1177, 1178, that thought is a garment, which on one hand is not the thing itself. It's a garment that enclothes whatever it's a garment to. In this case, machshav is a garment to the nefesh, and particularly to the seichel shabenefesh. So on one hand, it's a garment, which is like another entity. But on the other hand, when it comes to thought, machshava, he says this machshava has something that connects it very much to the expression of the soul, because it precedes the actual manifestation of the faculty of intelligence, of a specific intelligence. It's the mamutza, as he called it, the interface between the koyach hamaskil, the power to conceive ideas, and actual specific ideas. And in a broader sense, machshava is a levush to the nefesh itself. The nefesh itself carrying its message to all the faculties of all the keiches. So in that sense, machshava is, and why is it that in that case? Because machshava is an ethereal, a very refined, subtle form of garment. And as such, it's a fitting garment to the nefesh, and it unites and connects with the nefesh. Like kamsa levushim minei bay, as a garment that's connected to the source. Okay, now once we understand machshava, we're now going to go into dibur. Dibur is a second garment called speech, to speak. And there's dibur by us, which is of course the mashal, how we understand things in our terms. And there's dibur l'mayla, dibur elyon, God's speech. As I said yesterday at the end of the class, that all of this is achieving three things, really. Three things. God does not need any of these levels. He does not need faculties, attributes, sfiris, eidus, kalim, and all that. But he created a system through which we can understand how he works. And he created us as a parallel to that system. We reflect it within us. And finally, that also allows us to retrace the steps through Avodah and connect. So all these levels, at the end of the day, if you see, they're constantly going back and forth. On one hand, it's something outside of the source and the essence. On the other hand, it relates to the essence and different levels and forms. So it's giving us all the way that God creates and the process that we can relate to. Machshava, dibur, and machshava itself, all the levels we discussed. And this is also a way for us to climb the ladder and reconnect. But there's one more point. Chassidus Chabad, everything is more than just giving us a guide. It's actually a microcosm. Through our flesh, we can behold it all. So whatever we learn here is actually the way we function. The human being was created in the image of God, and we function in this fashion. That's why he constantly, he talks about, you ask somebody, what are you thinking? And he says nothing. And he explains that doesn't mean nothing at all. It means that you're not focused on something, or you're not feeling the asius, as he put it later. So we have here constantly, we have ourselves as an example for all these levels. So the levels help us connect from the top down, from the bottom up, like Shiluv Havai ba'Adnai and Shiluv Adnai ba'Havai and Shiluv Adnai Havai ba'Adnai, which we're going to learn about how they connect. And both from the top down and the bottom up. And at the same time, we also have a living example of all of this, which is within us. So all this comes together and creates a very eloquent type of integration between godliness and the human being, or godliness and existence. So that's always important to keep in mind in all Chassidus, and here we see it playing itself out. So now, unless somebody has a question, I'm going to go to the next paragraph. Mashenkin Hadibur, the middle of page 1178. And you can find the text if you need to go to the PDF of these pages at ayinbeis.com. Okay, any questions? Okay. So now, Mashenkin Hadibur, after explaining thought, machshavet, Mashenkin, by contrast, dibur, speech, shuluvush nifred min hanefesh, which is a separate garment from the nefesh. So yes, it's true in the beginning on page 1177, he said, Bachshava, he also used the word, halavush hare eina atzmus hadover, kamoy dover achar. In the beginning of the paragraph of Ayin. But first of all, he didn't use the word nifrad. He never used the word nifrad, separate. He just like a separate thing, like another thing, not a separate, dover achar, like another thing, not a separate thing, another thing, which is because machshav has eisius. And we discussed this as well yesterday, what that means, because at the end, he does say at the end of the paragraph, machshav is united with the nefesh. So I explained what that means, two different ways you can explain it. Number one, it's united because in general, that's what machshav is. Machshav is an expression of the nefesh to yourself. So on one hand, it's like another thing, but not like another thing that's separate. It's another thing that connects you with it and expresses the nefesh. And then, second point I made was, if you speak about machshav on both levels, as it relates to faculties, you can say it's more like another thing. Davar achar, kamoy davar achar. When you speak about the higher level of machshav, that is always the wheel that's turning, even before the faculties take hold in a specific way, there you could say perhaps that it's even more reflective of the nefesh. But at the end of the paragraph, he did say haba hatalia, that they're interdependent. So, because at the end of the day, it's one garment called machshav. But he doesn't use the word nifrad, because at the end of the day, machshav is within yourself. You can never say it's really separate from you. You can say it's like a different thing than the etzem hanefesh, than atzmus hadover rather. Yeah. Now he's using the word nifrad. So levush, a separate levush. Min hanefesh, from the spirit, from the soul, from the spirit. Shahari adibur, malbishas hakeches, k'moy shem b'mitzias keches dafke. We just said before, remember that machshava on its highest level is malbish, the keches, before they became keches. It's a garment that serves that second level of chachma, sheba chachma, that, and the same thing with the keches hanefesh. That's not quite the koyach hamaskil. It's outside of the actual potential state. It's now an ispashtus. There is a manifestation of intelligence or a manifestation of the life force. And machshava serves a role. It's malbish to express that. And then there comes the next level where machshava becomes shaped by the particular idea or concept or the particular faculty. Dibur doesn't have that first aspect. Dibur only comes into play once a koyach is already a specific koyach, only after step 3. Machshava exists on step 2 that we learned. Dibur doesn't exist on step 2. Because step 2, there's no speech. It doesn't exist. So dibur is only, they're already faculties. So now you're expressing them. Whether it's an intelligence, a specific idea, or you're expressing a feeling. But it doesn't have, but higher than that, on level 2, dibur doesn't have any role. So dibur is relating already to something that is nifred from the nefesh in that sense compared to machshav. And he gives an example, like Eisis HaDibur, the letters of speech, Hamabishim Es HaSeichel, that are garments for the seichel. So right now I'm speaking. hopefully something intelligent. So my words are levush for the ideas that I'm conveying. That's what dibur is. So he says, before the idea became evolved and emerged as a specific metzias seichel mamish, an actual intelligence. In other words, level 2, if there's no formulated idea, there's no words have no, they don't have any place there. They only come into play, they only have a role once you come to level 3, that you now have a mohus seichel. If you go back to the top of the page, you'll see those are the exact words he used. That level 2 is seichel hu moked goli. He says level 2. Let me just look for the exact language. And it's not yet a seichel prati. The words he used were exact words. I'm going to find it. Eir has-seichel was the word. Eir has-seichel, but it's not yet a specific idea, right? That's where machshava is, level 2. Dibur is not shaykh in level 2. It only comes into play, it only comes into action in level 3 once you have a mahus seichel, a particular mahus seichel. Just was looking for a particular expression, which I don't find right now. Yeah, koydem shu b'chinas mahus mitzias seichel adayin. Yeah, that's the language I was looking for, the bottom of 1177. Okay. So let's just distinguish a moment. Machshava, when he spoke about thought, he began first by saying it's kamoy davar achar. It's like a different thing because it's letters, oisius. The question is whether you feel the oisius or you don't, but there is something going on. There's some field of energy. We called it a channel, a carrier, a vehicle. So that's there. Additionally, machshava does not work on etzem. And even on Gimel Rishenus, as he said, the higher levels in an etzem, there's no shaykh garment altogether. And the same thing in the highest levels, the Gimel Rishenus, he also said there's no garment on the face. As we spoke, there's no garment, let's say, in the etzem of the moichin. So machshava relates to a lower level, but on the other hand, the way it relates, it's already there even before the faculties come into full definition. Dibura now is a garment that is also obviously not relating to the deeper levels, that's for sure. It's definitely not higher than machshava, but it's lower because it doesn't even have level 2, it only has level 3. I'm just contrasting the different stages of garments here. But now he's going to add one more thing. V'gam zeh, and also this, that dibur is only a garment that is expressing a particular specific faculty, level 3, that we call level 3 before. So he's adding now the word tzimtzum. That in addition to the fact that the garment of speech is only relevant once there's a particular faculty in play, in action, a function, in this case, let's say seichel. Additionally, this garment of speech relates to the seichel only as it is in a state of tzimtzum, in a diminished state. Because when there's the intensity of the flow of intelligence, in other words, not unfiltered, undiminished, unbridled, like the full intensity of a flow of ideas, of seichel, a person cannot speak then, or speak about those ideas. In other words, when a person has a rush of ideas, speech is not possible yet. Rak Hashem is tzimtzum. Only when he slows down and pauses and in a way diminishes that intensity, that mayin hamizgaber, that intense flow, that's when he can speak.
Mayin hamizgaber.
One second. Let me just finish. Let me explain. So, they used to say about the Ragat Shover that he had a lot of agmas nefesh on Shabbos because the flow of thought was flowing without diminish, and he couldn't write it down and couldn't express it, which would give it some grounding. So it would just flow. Say by the Magid, Mitler Rebbe would say sometimes Shah while he was speaking Chassidus, because the Nevi'as HaMeichin was so intense. He was like trying to quiet it down, because when it's flowing from the machshava level, where they have less tzimtzum, it's very hard to express. We see this all the time. When a person is in a place where they're completely absorbed, where they're absorbed in the flow of the idea, dibur is not really possible. And that's how you'll find someone will say, wait a minute, let me think it through. Let me formulate an idea, and then I'll express it. So what he's saying now is that dibur has another element that makes it more distant, in the sense that it's a subject and relates to the idea in a state of tzimtzum. That's what he just said here. I just used mayin hamizgaber as an expression. I didn't mean the actual Mishnah. I meant when there's what he calls nevi'as hameichin. He calls takev nevi'as mohus, takev nevi'as eirasechel iyav shaladaber by. Okay. Rak Hashem is tzimtzum, only when it gets diminished or concealed to some extent. V'gam kasher bo ba'if gezeh. And additionally, another point, and also when the seichel comes to a state, sheyocheli is begili el azulas. So it needs a tzimtzum, and also basically a state where it's capable of being communicated, or basically to be revealed to another. To go back again, because when a person is in a state of machshava, let's say a teacher, and the machshava is in a very intense place, so he needs to somewhat slow that down or quiet it down and diminish it, and it has to be in a way that the zulas, the other, if you speak like you think, sometimes you hear some people speak, they could be brilliant geniuses, but the speaking is completely incoherent because it's just the way they're thinking. And you say, the person is definitely thinking out loud. You don't really understand it. So the dibur has to be begili shaykh al azulas. He says v'gam. So that means kashem v'gam kashem ba'ifin kazeh, and the seichel is coming in a more tailored way. Sheyachali is begili al azulas, that it's capable of being revealed to another, obviously in a way that the other can receive it. Doesn't have to say that. That's obvious. He doesn't just mean that the guy opens his mouth, the teacher opens his mouth, and it's just revealed words. He means that's the gili el azulis.
It's the same thing, no? It's the same thing.
What's the same thing?
Mitzamtem and yochol lovo begili el azulas.
No, that's why does he say v'gam?
What's the difference?
That's a nice question, but he says v'gam. So I just explained the difference. Because tzimtzum means that you're slowing down the flow. But it could be slow it down in a way that's still not appropriate and tailored to the other. So there's an additional element here that the seichel also has to come into a form of expression that the dibur. So you can have tzimtzum, but not necessarily shaykh al azulas. You can't have shaykh al azulas without tzimtzum. But you can see there could be two stages in this regard. That's why you have some people, yes, they can diminish the flow, but then there's also making sure, in addition to that it's begili shaykh al azulas. They go together, but they could also be two steps in that process itself. Okay.
Oh, but why can a dibur not be without mitzamtem? Because the zulas won't understand. Dibur
I just
could
told
be
you
also
that.
without
Are you listening to what I just said? I said to get to another, you need tzimtzum, but you could have tzimtzum and not yet be completely shayach gilu tazulas. Anyway, let's move on. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's true. But the first thing, forget about Gilo Elazulas. Dibur could be without Tzimtzum.
Well, that's not the discussion here. I pointed out that the Rebbe Rashab says v'gam, that in addition to tzimtzum.
I know you're right.
Okay, that's all that's relevant here. That's all that's relevant. Nothing. What are you saying? He doesn't say you could have zulas and not tzimtzum. He doesn't say that. So what's the point?
He said, כשיש נביא עשר השכל, אי אפשר לדבר בו יקרא כאשר מצמצם. Why not?
I just explained it with the Maisa, with the Rebbe, with the Mittler Rebbe and the Magid. I explained it with the Ragat Shover, because on the Vias Meichel, flow in full intensity. I just spoke about it for 5-10 minutes. I'm not sure. Sounds to me like, did you hear what I said? I said when there's a very strong flow, a teacher will say, wait a minute, before I communicate, before this dibur, I need to slow down or quiet down the very intense flow. And then comes the v'gam that also relates to a student. Now, remember, the garments, the levushim of machshava and dibur, and ma'isa for that matter, are not just garments for seichel. They're also garments for midas. Because machshava, dibur, and ma'isa is the way every part of us is expressed. Like you said earlier about machshava, that it's not just for seichel. The general gili hanefesh, it comes through the levushim. There it could be the life force, so maybe it's not so relevant. But regarding what I'm saying here now, so now he's going to say the same idea is when you express in dibur an emotion. He explained how when you express an idea, seichel, chabad, in dibur, that it goes through, that number one is that dibur is only once you have the idea, and the idea is diminished in the tzimtzum, and it relates to another. And now he's going to say the same idea, same as with dibur and midas. V'chein b'midas. The same as with emotions. B'tekiv ispalas hamidas eini yochel ledaber. When a person is that intensity of an excitement and stimulation, is very intensely inspired emotionally, very, very emotional, he cannot speak. Eini yochel ledaber. Kim kasher eir mitzumtzum behem. Only when the air of the midas, the intensity of the emotion, quiets down somewhat, it gets subdued, and is somewhat diminished. So you see, when a person is really excited, then they're sometimes even if they try to speak, it doesn't come out properly. So you see the same idea that dibur always follows tzimtzum. It's never the full intensity of the idea or the emotions it is expressing. Then the Rebbe Rashab adds the following parentheses. V'yesh lepamim, there are times shebetirdas emeka seichel emida, that when a person is tirdas is in the effort, in the tirdas more than effort, it's in the exertion of a person in the depth of an idea or a feeling. We're talking now that they're immersed in the depth of it, in the center of it. So at times you can find that a person who's very intensely involved in an idea or an emotion will speak automatically. They'll just speak without preparing even. Like, the words will just come out of them. He's qualifying what he just said. He said, you say speeches only after tzimtzum. We see sometimes, it's not a question. He's just giving a scenario where you see sometimes in the throes of an intense idea, a person's really immersed, or an emotion or intense emotion, words will come out without automatically. He says, memela bli achona. In other words, you're not preparing to speak, and it's not like you're ready. You're saying, okay, I want to express myself, and I want to explain. I want to express my idea, or I want to express my emotion. Hine dibur zeh, says the Rebbe Rashab, this speech ain't a dibur mamish. This is not considered actual speech, mamish, literal speech. This is how dibur is bottle. You could say nullified or sublimated or absorbed, and encompassed in the idea or in the emotion. So in other words, something is coming out in dibur, but that's not what we call the levusha dibur, is when you have premeditated and deliberate speech that you thought about an idea or you felt an emotion, and then you said, I'm going to communicate this now to another. So there's a very deliberate effort in doing so. The dibur, in this case, where someone just inadvertently blurts out words while they're in the middle of learning something, they could say, it could be words like gavaldik, it could be words even of the idea, or they blurt out something in dibur while they're in a very intense emotional state. He's calling that not dibur mamish. He's calling that more of a dibur that's just like an inadvertent expression that is bottle and kol b'seichel b'midas. So it's not the dibur of the levusha dibur that we're discussing here. It is dibur, but it's not dibur mamish. That's the word he uses. So in the customary way of the Rebbe Rashab, he qualifies all scenarios. In case somebody would ask that question, we do see this dibur even when there's no tzimtzum, even when there's someone intensely involved in an idea or an emotion. Okay. So continuing on, Hari Shadibur Malbishas Akeches Dafke. So he's summing up now what we just said. We actually said three things about dibur. It's malbish the keches, not before their faculties. It's only a garment that encloses the actual faculties. The way these faculties are already tangible, concrete, defined, substantial faculties, not like level 2, where they're not yet a seichel or a koyach prati. Now he combines both, and the way that koyach seichel is diminished in order. Now he doesn't say the word gam; he says in order to be hashpa, to be transmitted and revealed to another. So that's a summation of the levush of dibur. This is what the role and the purpose of the garment called speech.
So he would say,
and I was going to make
somebody saying "ow" or "help" spontaneously is not true dibur. And
if it's coming inadvertently when they're in the intensity, that when they're in the throes and the intensity of an idea or emotions, you just said it's coming out of them, but it's not the dibur in the full role of what dibur is meant to be. Okay. Now he's going to make some other distinctions between dibur and machshava. Remember, machshava, we said, was tmidi. It's ongoing all the time. A person is always thinking. Question is if they're thinking about something particular or it's just in general. And they can't even put their finger on it because they don't feel the oasis and so on. Dibur, on the other hand, the ein dibur tmidi. Dibur is not constant. Shariyochli is kameshas below dibur. It can be a number of hours that a person does that there's no speech at all. So that's very clear. Dibur and machshava. Now the machshava is always mishetetes tamid. We spoke. The wheel is always turning. Dibur is not the case. A person can be silent for hours. Ukeshemedaber, and when he does speak, ein ze shabah dibur memela. It's another key point in this. Machshava is memela, always thinking. It's not because you're making an effort to think. I'm talking about the thought, the general thought process. We're not talking about the specific focus on a particular idea. Dibur, besides it not being constant, needs an effort. It doesn't come memela. Ein ze shabah dibur memela. It doesn't come automatically. We're not talking about the dibur that comes in the middle of when they're in the throes of the intensity of an idea or emotion. We're talking about the deliberate dibur to communicate an idea to another. He says it doesn't come memela. Ki im b'ritzeinei talya milsa. is dependent on his ratzon. You have to desire, you have to want to speak. And again, we're talking about an intelligent person, not a shikr, not someone who's intoxicated that just doesn't have any control over their words, or someone who just doesn't have control. So, but it's saying Italian milse. You need to desire, you need to want it. She'im yirtzi yadaber, v'im yirtzi yishtek. If he wants, he'll speak. And if he'll desire, if he wants, he'll be quiet. It's an option. You could be sitting in a conversation with people, and you could choose to speak, you could choose to be quiet. Even if you have something to say, doesn't mean you have to say it. So dibur clearly is, number one, not tmidi, it's not constant. And now he's adding that it's also something that comes with a particular, you have to want it. You have to switch it on, so to speak. It's not automatically rolling. Okay. Now comes another parenthesis. Let's see how long this one is. Oh, 4 lines. He's going to now qualify this and go a little more specific with machshava. Because machshava, we know, a person can definitely control, me'ech shal ta'alev, you can control, what he said, what you think about. But you don't control the actual thought process. In other words, that a person always has the thought, is always a rolling, a spinning wheel. That's what he's going to say now. He says, that what we just said, that dibur is dependent on ratzon, and machshava flows automatically. He says, at machshava, you also have the capacity to control, lishlet, to rule and control what you're thinking about. Livshet machshava zu. So in other words, let's say you're thinking of a particular thought. You can livshet. Livshet means actually like a lavush, undress. You can remove your thought from this particular idea. Ulilbish machshava acheres, and dress up the machshava in a different thought, which is the basis of what he says in Tanya Perikut Beis. That's what he says. A person has a thought about something that's, let's say, not appropriate. You have the control to change what you're going to think about. So you could change where to direct your thought. So there's also a ratzon involved. However, that's what the thought will consist of. In other words, you have a power to dress the garment of thought. You can dress it on this idea, or this emotion, or a different emotion, or a different idea. But to say that it doesn't have any thought, that you cannot have. Without thought at all, there's not possible. You can change what you think about, but you can't stop thought. Speech is completely subject. You could speak, you could be quiet, like he said. Now, I was going to explain a bit how this change happens in thought. And this transfer of what you're going to think about, what he just called, that you can take the thought, undress it from this garment is right now, let's say, a garment to a soiled thought. So machshava zara. You can take the garment, machshava, and remove it from that idea that you're thinking about and place it on a machshava teva, on a good thought, on something in Torah, Kedusha. So now he's saying this transfer of thought, of garment, this garment transfer of thought, that is through not changing the thought process, but you're changing what faculties the thought is dressing up, is in clothing. The kashashelet al atzmei, when a person is in control of themselves, in other words, they're controlling, they're not just letting their thoughts control them. They're controlling themselves. So if he's right now involved in thinking about one thing, he has the power to connect himself and bond to a different inyan. So now, once you focused on something else, so the machshava will now be transferred over to that something else. What he's adding here is saying that this whole point has nothing to do with machshava itself. It's not about the thought. It's about your control, what you're going to think about. Because thought is always flowing. The question is, what is it going to focus on? It can focus on shtusim and nonsense. It can focus on learning Torah. It can focus on helping. There's a lot of things. So machshava is just a garment. The question is, what are you going to put the garment on? And that is in our control. So once you change what faculty you're going to change the garment, let's just take chesed and gvura. Let's say you're in a mood of being chesed, kind to someone. Now you can go ahead and say, you know what, in this situation, we need gvura because the person did something. You need din, we need discipline. So the machshava will change from a machshava of chesed to machshava of gvura. So the machshava itself doesn't really change. It's always there. What changes is what entity is it going to enclose, what garment will it, what thing will it dress up, so to speak. Okay. So there is also ratzon, but the ratzon is not about to think or not to think, it's what to think about. And in Dibur, the ratzon controls the actual levush. Should you speak, should you not speak? Not just what you should speak about, but should you speak altogether? Ulechein, and therefore, hamachshava hi bebchinas hisachdus. And that's why, once we have established now, to sum up, the difference between thought and speech, that thought is always, and mamela, and thought, as we said before, is even there before the faculties take on shape and form. Dibur, on the other hand, is only possible once there's a faculty, a functioning faculty. And that too, it's not and that too has to go through a tzimtzum and to relate to another. And that is not constant and not mamela. So that tells you why machshava is a b'chinas hisachdus. Like you said in the previous paragraph. Machshava is connected, just like the nefesh is always there. Machshava is always there. Dibur, on the other hand, is not that way, and he continues with riboy ha'eschalkus u'b'dibur dafka. So machshava is achdus, is a unity, and connected with the soul, as we learned. Dibur is the other way around. It's all about riboy ha'eschalkus. It's about breaking things down into a multitude of details. I know you'd say, why wouldn't he say Sachdus and Pirud? Unity and separate. I would say because he's writing it B'kitzur, because once you say there's a lot of details, the focus is, of course, now on the details, not just on the core idea, as we said, it comes through a tzimtzum. I think that's why he's saying it. The mashachesha b'machshava achas. He's continuing on to explain the difference. What a person thinks in one thought, ubamiyav zman, and in a short interval, in a short period of time. Harizeba b'dibur b'ribu hischalkus, b'har b'tzirufim u'b'ribu zman. So he's making now another distinction. When you think about something, one thought, one short thought is in quality, it has a lot of intensity. When it comes into speech, you need more than one word. You need many words to express it, and it takes a period of time to express it. So you can think of an idea, that thought may last, let's say, a minute or 5 seconds, it doesn't matter. It's one thought and quick. When you speak it, it's going to take, you need many words to express it. It says, "B'ribu yischalkus," to break it down to many different, not just words, but ideas or expressions, to express the idea. B'har b'tzirufim. Tzirufim means combination of words or different ways of explaining it. U'b'ribu zman. And relatively speaking, b'ribu zman with a longer time period. And why is this the case? V'hainu lefi, and this is due to the fact shemachshava u'levush ruchni adayin. Like he's using back the words he used earlier, because machshava is still a levush ruchni. Relatively speaking, it's a ethereal, a very subtle and refined garment. Umeyuchad im nefesh, and it's when united with the nefesh. because it's closer to expressing that nefesh, even though it's still a levush, but it's a, we said, like a field, a vehicle, a channel, I would say. What I explained yesterday, I said, just like oir to the etzem, machshav is to oir, haseichel. So it's a much closer expression of the soul. That's why it's there even before you actually have specific faculties. That's why Isachke, so it means Isachdus here, that all the details are all concentrated in a type of oneness and all in a very short period of time. Vadibur, by contrast, speech, on the other hand, liyese levush hanifrad, not levush miyuchad. It's a levush hanifrad. It's a separate garment that comes into action at a later stage in the expression of the keiches hanefesh. It comes in a multitude and distinctions and diversity or many different details. I'm sorry, b'riboy is chalkus, in many different details or many distinctions, many multitude and diversity. Okay. Any questions so far? If not,
that means that the nefesh is having a like the act, a skira klolis, right?
Lamaila, you could say machshava gduma da'ak is like the level of machshava. Yeah, it's like a one snapshot, one picture. Yeah, that fits. That's why it's called machshava gduma da'ak. Machshava. Yeah, that works. Here he's talking even on a lower level, even on a very basic human faculty level, how we work. That our machshava works this way as well. I'll just say one more thing. I've said it already, but I think it's important to point out because things can be a little confusing. Remember, machshava is conscious and accessible thought. Machshava is not koyach machshava. Machshava is not the potential for thinking. It's the garment. It's already a vehicle. The only question is it one where you feel that actual ideas, like you said, are the eisius murgoshim or they're not murgoshim? But machshava is not the entity itself. When you look at a neshama, or let's call it a nefesh, and the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, the nefesh has 10 keiches, Chabad, Chagas, Nehim, Meichin, and Midas. Before he speaks about machshava dibur ma'isa. So the keiches ha-nefesh is the actual entity of what a nefesh is. This has nothing to do with consciousness, with awareness, with expression, with vehicles. It is what it is. The Eibishter created a nefesh that has 10 keiches, nishtalshel mehem. They evolved from the 10 spheres of Atzilus. The 10 spheres, as they come down. That's that. If you only had that, you just have an entity. Without a garment, you don't have an expression. Machshava is the first expression of the nefesh, the first, and the one that's closest to the nefesh, because its expression is in a very sublime and subtle way. God created within a levush, that would be a process, that would be like a turning wheel, like we spoke about yesterday. So that is Meshetetes Tamid, it's always there. And now you have something by which the nefesh could express itself. Now I know you could say, isn't that called Eir HaNefesh, Keiches HaNefesh? But the Eir and Keiches HaNefesh, comparably speaking, are still part of the nefesh. We're talking about an expression where, in the case of the human being, if, for example, we were born only with the 10 Keiches HaNefesh and no levushim, we would never be in touch with our own nefesh. It would be there and would give us, it exists. But the machshava is that type of like field of energy, or I called it like a quilt, a type of the first energy that comes out in a way where the expression, it's still to yourself, and it's still sometimes not even defined. As we said, the higher levels of machshava is just there before the keiches begin to manifest in any specific way. And then machshava will continue the process of dressing up a particular idea or an emotion. Dibur, on the other hand, comes much later in the stage. It's not part of the nefesh's natural expression, so to speak. It's already now a force that we were given that we have to willingly choose to speak. It has to be with a tzimtzum. It's already around specific faculties. It has to come through a tzimtzum to relate to another. So it's very different roles. So because machshava is a levush ruchni adayin, and it's therefore it's umiyuchid nefesh, and in a sense is umiyuchid connected with the nefesh. That's why it comes in a state of isachdus. Everything there is united. But dibur, liyese levush hanifred. Dibur,
the purpose of machshava is to megalit to them goof, right?
I don't know if the word goof is the right word, to megalit to the person in a conscious way. We should be conscious.
The goof.
Where's the word? I don't know why you have to use the word goof. Why don't you just call human consciousness?
Okay.
But bottom line is, yeah, if you don't have machshava, that doesn't mean a person doesn't have seichel. It just means the seichel will never be expressed in any way that you're conscious of, that you're aware of. It remains. Bahadibur, liyese levush hanifred, and dibur being a separate garment, that comes in a multitude, in many different specific details. Now he continues, v'zehu, and this is also the reason, sha'kelim le'esi sadibur, what are the instruments, the kelim, to express ourselves? You can't, dibur is not just opening your mouth and letting out a sound. The sound has to be shaped, because dibur is a shaped expressions. She says the kelim, the esis hadibur for the letters of speech, they are the 5 gutturals, the 5 forms of expression in the mouth. Shein kelim gashbim, they're physical containers, they're physical vessels, they're physical instruments. We know what the 5 are, right? The lips, the palate, the tongue, the teeth, and the throat. So if you look at all the letters of Chav Beis Eishis of Aleph Beis, the different letters, like Acheh, are throat letters. Throat. Aleph Ches Hey Ayin. Beis Gimel Mem Pei is lips. And so on with the other letters. So for you to be able to shape a letter, it's not enough just to release a sound. If God forbid a person didn't have those 5 gutturals, the 5 what they call the forms of expression, the heimetzois hapeh, it would just come out like a sound of a shofar. If you want it to be letters that actually have a pronounced letters, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled, and like you need to have these 5 kelim, that the Oyer Hadibur, the Hevel HaRuach, which means the breath, travels through them like a flute, and they shape the different letters to come out with particular expression. So it'd be like a shapeless sound going through the gutturals. The 5 different expressions that I just mentioned creates the shape of the sound, which makes a word. That's what's called dibur, speech. Speech isn't just a sound. Speech is a shaped sound. And he says those are kelim gashmim. They're not kelim ruchnim. They come from the physical body. The Mishkan HaMachshava, the residing place, the dwelling place of the thought, where does thought dwell? Where does the thought reside or rest? Hu b'mayach. It's in the mind. Sheyesh gam sham hei mitzayis. There's also 5 forms of expression. Aval hein ruchnim. In other words,
what is this?
One second, I'm middle of explaining. That's what I'm going to explain. That's why we're here to learn. So he says like this: if you were to right now sit silently and not speak, you can think in your mind of words and letters. You could try right now. You could think of the words, let's say, machshava and dibur, without saying it. In your mind, you could say to yourself, machshava dibur, without having to move your lips, without having to speak. So you see there's a concept of letters also in machshava. except in machshava, they don't have physical shape. They only have ruchnizdika shape. That's like when you imagine in your mind, let's say you look at an apple on the table. There's an apple, a physical apple. You can touch it, you can taste it, you can smell it, etc. You can close your eyes and visualize that apple. So you have a tziyur in machshava, but it's a tziyur ruchni. It's not an actual apple as we understand it in the physical sense. So what he's saying is that machshava also has eisius. In other words, you also have an aleph and a beis and a gimel, but it doesn't have any physical shape and expression. It's a ruchnizdika aleph, a ruchnizdika beis. Think of it like I mentioned when you type letters on a computer. You press an aleph, you're not really pressing an aleph. The aleph sends a digital message, which is all electricity and digital. But then it comes out, when you print it, you see an aleph on paper, because it then turns into a physical aleph. So there's a stage where the eisius are still what he calls the heimetzos ruchnim. So the distinction between aleph and beis exists also in machshava, but it's a spiritual distinction, which means it's not defined in any particular way. It's almost like you can say it's even imaginary, but it's there. You could think.
Heimetzos. Why is it heimetzos? I understand.
Because aleph is different than beis. Because aleph in your thought is different than beis. When you say the word machshava, it's different than the word dibur in your mind. When you think of the word machshava, it has letters. Those letters are mitzvahs because later they will be mitzvahs. Can mean two things. The mitzvahs can be in the physical sense. It's an actual sound of an aleph and a beis. In machshava, it's a spiritual sound of an aleph and a beis, or a spiritual shape of an aleph and a beis. If you imagine right now the visual image of an aleph, it doesn't look like a beis. But someone will say to you, what is there? You'll say, it's all in my mind. But there is a difference between how my mind is visualizing an aleph and beis. The same thing with the sounds. There's no sound coming out, but there's a distinction. So if we didn't have mitzvahs altogether, then all the letters would be like one, would be one thing. The fact that you have mitzvahs in the machshava makes you able to distinguish between aleph and beis in your thought. In dibur, obviously, it takes on a whole different shape. It's actually physical expression of it all. Mashenkin, hey mitzvahs hapeh. By contrast, however, the five gutturals, the five instruments, or the five ways of expression from the mouth, hein gashmim, they are physical. Like I said, aleph, beis, gimel, there's physical. And remember, even in dibur, relatively speaking, you could also still call it ruchni if you wish, because it only has a physical sound. It doesn't come, when you write it down, it becomes even more tangible. But the physical sound has a very particular sound. Like I said, acheh, aleph ches hey ayin, beis gimel mem pei, and others have actual physical sound. So he says, gashmim hamachalkes umafrides esakel, that distinguish and separate the sound. Remember, koil is just the sound. It separates and distinguishes and separates the sound. Bibchinas, next page, 1179, hischalkus mamish. In our actual real hischalkus. In machshava, there's also a difference between one thought and another, one idea, one word and another, one letter and another. But it's not hischalkus mamish because it's all in the thought. It's all still in the light, the Eira Machshava. And here it's come into Kalim Gashmim, actually, which give it real, tangible distinction. Okay. So with this, he concludes the mashal, Machshava and Dibur. Now he's going to continue. We're going to stop here, but on the top of page 1179, he's going to say, V'adugma mizeh yuvan lamayla. And now we're going to come back, all this long page and a half, almost 2 pages, page and a half, has been around machshava and then dibur. And now he's going to come back and explain with that. The topic began, remember, with Oden, with Adnai. So he's going to explain what is machshava and dibur l'mayla. I mean, he used already some references, but not really l'mayla. Most of this was either in the faculties or Yeah, most of this was, not most, all of it was really explaining it mipsari echza, from our flesh, from the way it is by us. He's now going to explain machshav and dibur lamaila. So we'll stop here on the